Code please.
Welcome to Code Please. In this channel, I try to teach you a little bit about computer programming using the Elixir language. If you find this content useful, please consider subscribing and sharing with your friends. Now let's get into today's video. Hi, in this video, we will go through the process of creating a new web server using the Phoenix web framework, and you will see that Phoenix actually facilitates a lot of the things that we did in the previous video, where we implemented our own web server just using plug and plug cowboy, and gives us much more. So Phoenix basically gives us for free, and quoting from their website, a way to build rich interactive web applications quickly with less code and fewer moving parts. So it's basically kind of a model view controller pattern with some functional ideas built in where like you have a controller module that handles the HTTP requests. You have a view that basically will conceptualize what the response will be to the user and then call a particular template to represent that response to the user or to the browser in this case. And you also have the model layer, which represents the data in the database typically. In this case, in the Phoenix case, it's called schema. So you'd have a schema module per table in your database, and then they would be interconnected, and that's the way you actually access data from the database. So other funny things include like the request response speed is actually measured in nanoseconds as opposed to milliseconds like in most web frameworks out there, which I when I first found out about Phoenix, I found this to be really interesting. Like their standards are faster, basically. It's also based on the concept of plugs, which we already investigated in a previous video. So you can add plugs to your request response flow. You can take advantage of everything that we implemented before and use it inside Phoenix, which is pretty cool. It also gives you like telemetry, so instrumentation in your code, so you can easily keep track of what your app is doing and how it's doing it. And it also provides you with a fantastic live dashboard, on which you can take a look at the insides of the virtual machine, the BEAM, and also like you get all sorts of metrics from telemetry in there. You can publish your requests per second. You can go very granular on each entry point, how it's doing, what it's doing, and how's the load on the system and all those sorts of things, which is pretty cool, and you get that for free. It also gives you a distributed publishing subscribing system with support for presence. So it's really easy to build, for instance, a chat application or a Twitter clone where if one user posts a tweet, let's use Twitter as an example, but like if one user posts a tweet, all the other open browsers get notified about this new post and they immediately display it on their own pages. So instantly, and this is pretty cool without page reloads. It also gives you live view, and live view is like having all the responsiveness and speed of client-side applications that could use something like React or Vue or some other client-side technology, and you get this without writing almost any JavaScript code. So it's basically an abstracting way of writing responsive web pages, but they are dealing immediately with the server. So there's no need for an API, for instance, where the React code or the client code will call the server and ask the server to perform something. This is done like in real time behind the scenes for you, which is amazing in my opinion. It also gives you a built-in templating language, so you can compose those templates that get rendered on the client browser. Gives you internationalization and localization through getText, and you get configuration support, so you can basically define how your server runs in development mode, in testing mode, and in production, and gives you a lot more. So it also integrates with Acto, which is the library to interact with databases like Postgres or MySQL or something like that. So I really advise you to take a look at their website and the installation guides, because there's a lot of cool stuff and there's a lot of features that I didn't mention that they have. and it's just amazing. It's for sure the fastest way to write a website or a web application. So let's get started installing Phoenix. The first thing we want to do is make sure we have the X Package Manager installed. The X Package Manager is basically the package manager for the entire Erlang ecosystem, including Elixir. So let's type in mixlocal.x, and this will make sure that we have X installed locally. So we just press enter, and it assumes the most recent version. As you can see, I already had one version installed, but this is going to upgrade it to the newest version. Next, we need to make sure that we have a specific archive installed locally from the X Package Manager, which is the bootstrapping mechanism called phx new. And this is what is going to allow us to generate a new Phoenix project very simply. So we just do mix archive.install x, and then the name of the command that we want to install locally. And Phoenix provides this one to bootstrap new Phoenix installations. And then it's going to ask us to install. And by the way, we should do this whenever Phoenix releases a new version. If we want to start projects in the most recent version of Phoenix, we should always do this and make sure that we have the latest phx._new command. So once this is done, we can now run a very special mix task called mix_phx.new. And we're going to pass in the parameter no_ecto because we don't want to do anything with databases just now. So I'm just going to create a sample server that doesn't use a database, basically. And we're going to call it hello Phoenix. Or let's actually use this syntax. Hello Phoenix. This is going to create all the files necessary for us to have a Phoenix server running. And it's going to ask us if we want to install the dependencies. We can just press enter, which is the same as pressing Y. And it's going to run mixdeps.get, which we are already familiar with. And it's going to compile the entire project and basically get all the things ready for us. And once the command is finally done, we can see that Phoenix presents us with a few options of things that we can do, like starting the server or starting the server inside an interactive Elixir console as well. But first, let's take a look at what is Phoenix all about in terms of the structure of the projects and all those things. Taking a look at the folder structure that Phoenix provides for a new project, we have a few important folders that we should know about. Namely, the assets folder is pretty much where we have all our CSS and our JavaScript files, and also any vendor JavaScript libraries that we want to include in our project and use it. The config folder is where we actually configure our web server, and we can specify which kind of configurations we want, for instance, to run locally or to run as a test environment or to deploy to production. And we have this special, well, going a bit more in depth, the config is where you define the common configurations for all the environments. And then dev is the development environment, basically when you're developing locally. Prod is when you deploy it to prod, and it's the configurations that are run there or are set up there. Test is when the configurations for running unit tests. And runtime is a special configuration file that allows you to inject configurations into your application based, for instance, in environment variables. And this file is run in actually all of the environments. So if you require your application to be dependent on an environment variable, like, I don't know, you want to define the port in production to be different, and you want to read it from the environment variable, or if you have a secret key that you only want to keep in your server so that you don't put it into version control, this is the file where you would inject that configuration into your app. Then we have the deps folder, which is basically where the mix dependencies are, or the X dependencies are copied to. So when you do mix deps.get, this is where they get copied to. Lib is basically where the code of your project lives. And typically Phoenix divides things into two main folders. a web or application name underscore web folder where all the things related to serving requests to the browser live, and and another folder with the name of the project, which is where your business logic, quote unquote, would live. So ideally, here you have the controllers and the views and the templates and all that handle a web request, and then those modules would call some code inside the project name that would perform some business logic and return that to the other folder. This will make sense later, but for now, keep that in mind. Then we have the prev folder that contains things like translations or static assets like images, fav icons, and things like that you want to serve statically for the browsers. And then you have the test where all your tests live, basically. And obviously, you also have other things like you have the mix exs file that defines your application. We already know about this. And there's a few more files like git ignore, so you can ignore some files from version control, a formatter file that allows you to specify how you want to format your code, for instance, and that's pretty much it. Now, so that we see that this is actually pretty much what we've been doing in the past, but augmented. So we can go to our application folder and we can see that we have an application module here. And this is pretty much the same that we have been doing so far. So when we did our own custom-made web server, this is exactly what we did. We defined the mix application. We defined a bunch of processes that start under a supervision tree, and it's pretty much similar. So the big difference is that you start a Phoenix endpoint, which is a module that you also declare yourself here, or that Phoenix generates for yourself. And there's a bunch of other things that Phoenix already includes, like telemetry, which I mentioned in the intro, and also the pub sub system, and you can have more things here. This is pretty much the same that you're already used to. So if we take a look at the endpoint module in Phoenix, this is where you declare things like session options, static files that you want to serve, and how code reloading works, and a few other things, and also like all the plugs that you have, because Phoenix is based on the plug system. So you have all these plugs where your request will go through it, and yeah, it's pretty much that. And the endpoint ends with the router plug, which pretty much specifies all your endpoint routes. So in our in our first web server, we defined this as part of a special plug that we developed, a router plug, where we specified if user goes to /foobar, then he gets a certain type of response. Here in Phoenix, Phoenix declares this router, and you can take a look at it here. It's nothing more than pretty much the same we defined before, but with a bunch of macros to simplify our lives. So you can say things like, I have a scope, which is the slash or the root of my endpoints. And then if the user just types slash or doesn't type anything, just types the domain, for instance, of my server, it goes to the page controller. And this is basically what this says. And then we can augment this with, for instance, if he does /dev, then it goes to something else. And it can be like a hierarchy of endpoints that we can define here as well. And if we take a look, for instance, at one of these controllers, like the page controller, we can see that this defines a function called index and renders a view called index.html. And this already gives us a hint of the type of response that we're going to return to our client if he calls slash on our server. And if we take a look at the page view, or rather, this is actually implicit. If we take a look at the page index.html HEEX, which is a template, this is our template that we're going to return to the user. So if we would go to the web server, we would see this HTML being spit back. So if we go into our project and we do mix phx.server, we can start our server up. And it's going to compile some things for us. And then it starts our server in the port 4000 by default. And you can see that Phoenix is actually waiting for changes. So it's watching all the files inside of the project. And it's pretty cool because if you change things, they basically update in real time. And we can see, like, if I go to localhost 4000, this is basically what's being rendered that you saw. So this is this. We have a section phx0, which is this big thing. I think this is based on Bootstrap by default, but you can change the CSS framework if you want. And then you get these resources with the 3 links and all that. So this is basically what it is. And the cool thing about this is that you get live reload, which basically allows you to do things like, if you look at welcome, for instance, and I change here to welcome Pedro, and I save the file, I get instant reloads on the things that I'm doing. And this is super productive. This framework is really, really amazing. So far, what we have is basically a normal web server, similar to the one that we implemented ourselves, with a few more bells and whistles on top of it. But nonetheless, it's a web server similar to, say, Ruby on Rails or PHP or Laravel or some other framework like that. But where I think like Phoenix really shines is in something called Live View. And if we take a look at our current infrastructure, so to speak, that we have in place, we have a router that basically routes incoming requests to the proper controller on this server. In this case, if we go to / or to the root URL, we get directed by the router to the page controller, and then the page controller in turn redirects to the template and uses the template to format the response for the client. And this is using a pool of processes on the virtual machine that are under supervision tree, under the endpoint process. And whenever a request comes in, one of those pooled processes takes ownership of this request and performs the whole request response cycle that is normal on a web server. But Phoenix Live View is something a little bit different. Phoenix Live View actually instantiates a new virtual machine process per page that is open. And it actually keeps that connection open via WebSockets. So I implemented a sample Live View here, and don't mind the macro that is using to set up the request. It's basically live instead of or get or post or any other of the standard REST specification requests. This is a special one from Phoenix, says this is a live view. It replies at the address or at the endpoint /chat. And basically the live view lives in this module, live.chat. And if we take a look at this live chat that I implemented here, I'm just going to uncomment it. Basically what it does is it uses phoenix.liveview, and this already provides it with all the mechanisms necessary to do what I was saying. Whenever you access /chat, there's a new process spawned on the virtual machine that stays kind of glued to the browser or connected to the browser via WebSockets. So if I go to /chat here and I do this, I am now looking at a page that is communicating directly with the dedicated process on the server. And these updates that you see here of the value are actually running server side. So this is not JavaScript. It is and it isn't, because Phoenix Live View abstracts away all the JavaScript for you. And you can basically specify a render function on the live view, and that where we are rendering the value. And this is a value that is inside the process. So it's basically part of the process state in this case. And whenever the view mounts, or basically whenever we access this page in particular, what I am doing here is I am sending a message to myself, to the same process. And we have seen this kind of code before. And we are saying, okay, I want to send a tick message after 1 second, and I'm just going to return, okay, this live view mounted. And the result of this is that you get an instant response on the browser, the page is rendered. And since the server is dedicated to the request that you did, after 1 second, this process on the server is going to send a message to itself saying tick, and it's going to get intercepted by this function handle info, which will in turn say, okay, in about 1 second, I want to send the same message to myself so I can repeat the timer. And plus I'm assigning to my socket or my web socket, let's say, I want to assign to the socket the value plus 1. So the value that I already have on the assigns on the socket plus 1. And this is why you see that the value keeps increasing. I'm just, the process on the server is just increasing one value at a time every 1 second. And since it's connected to the browser, you instantly see this. It's modifying the contents on the browser immediately. And this is amazing. This is like having a client-side technology like React or Vue.js or Angular or something like that, but it's running on the server. You don't need to write JavaScript to have these sorts of things. And if this sounds too simple for you, how about we do a small chat application without database, but like just, real-time users sending messages to each other? How simple can that be in a Phoenix Live View? So we can take advantage of, for instance, PubSub, which is a publish subscribe system that is built into Phoenix and allows, for instance, live views to communicate between themselves or between any other processes that are running on the BEAM. It's really simple to do this. The only thing we need to do is like we create a channel that we want to subscribe to, and when the live view starts, we're going to subscribe to it. In this case, I'm calling the channel chat, and then we'll just figure out a way to send messages. So let's replace our value with a list of messages that we have received so far, and also a little form to send a message. This is a special attribute in HTML or in live views that informs the live view that when it submits this form, it actually sends a message to the running process, which is pretty cool. So there's not a new post request running. It's just a normal WebSocket message, which is really fast. And then we need to implement a couple of messages. Namely, we need to implement a way to listen to our messages. So whenever whenever a message is sent to our chat subscribe channel, we need to interpret that. And the only thing we're going to do here is just take that one message that someone sent and append it to our process state in the messages. So socket assign messages plus the new message. And we also need to implement this send handler for the form. And this is going to be really simple as well. So I'll just put it here. And it's a special function from Phoenix, handle event. It's similar to handle info. Handle info is generic for the BEAM, so any process can implement handle info, and this will basically allow it to receive messages from the process mailbox that they have. Handle event is more Phoenix specific, but in the end, it ends up being the same. It's just a message being sent to a process. And when we submit this form, we can see that we have a name here and a message. Just going to save this so it refreshes. Name is going to be like the name of the user, and messages is what the user wants to send. And this translates to a handle event send, which is this, with the message and the name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to compose a string saying name says something, and then we're going to broadcast this message to PubSub in the same format that we are reading from the other function. And if we try this out, if we write something like Pedro here and it says hello, and we press enter, we can see that Pedro says hello. And so far so good, but the really cool thing now is that since PubSub works across all processes, basically, any processes that subscribe to this chat channel are going to receive the same message. So if a user comes here, a new user comes here and goes to the exact same URL, there's another process being spawned to it, and he can just reply to the other guy like, hi. And both get the same message because they both subscribe to the same PubSub channel. And this is amazing. I mean, it's like a chat application. Super simple. How are you? And they both get it. And I don't know, this for me is kind of life-changing in web development. It simplifies so much, like inter-process communication simplifies so much these sorts of things of creating interactive applications where People can just communicate with each other, having presence systems, and you can write a Twitter clone in 15 minutes. Like the Phoenix creator Chris McCord did this. There's a video. I'll post the link in the description, and I strongly advise you to see, because it shows all these concepts and much more. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this brief intro to Phoenix, and we'll try to build something a bit more ambitious next time. So until then, see you. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and liking and sharing with your friends. It really helps the channel to grow. Thank you.